Of all the negative traits which exist within humanity, deceitfulness, ignorance, foolishness, there is none more frustrating and pervasive than hypocrisy. How can you explain to someone that what ideas they entertain contradict the very core of the ideology they so desperately believe is true? No one is absolutely safe from hypocrisy, not even those who try their damnedest to be educated and objective. However, there is a startling correlation between hypocrisy and arrogance, and unfortunately, I believe there is no group more caught up in their own beliefs at this current time than those who sit at the far end of the woke movement. The certainty with which they believe that what they preach is correct is only matched by their ignorance to reality. In an attempt to reach what they believe is equality and inclusion, the woke movement has segregated and stonewalled further diversification of society, and by doing so, contradicted the nature of classical liberalism which the movement was based on in the first place. Let me be clear before I begin. I don't like organized political parties or movements. I believe that a person is smart, but people are stupid. Whether it be politics, religion, or any ideology, it's plain to see that the IQ of an individual and the collective IQ of many individuals remains roughly equivalent. Once a person is relieved of thinking critically by a larger group, they cease to do much thinking at all. Now, back to the topic at hand. In recent years, we have seen the emergence of a more intense woke culture. What is woke culture, you may ask? Well, unless you've been living under a rock, or more than likely, not on Twitter, you may not know exactly what the definition of this movement is. One definition, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, is, quote, aware of and actively attentive to important societal facts and issues, especially issues of racial and social justice. If we are to look back at the origins of the woke movement, this evaluation would be correct. However, ironically, the origins of the word are not actually as woke as it may seem, no pun intended. The earliest recognized use of wokeness as a concept came from Jamaican philosopher and social activist Marcus Garvey, who wrote in 1923, quote, wake up, Ethiopia, wake up, Africa. Let us work towards the one glorious end of a free, redeemed, and mighty nation. Let Africa be a bright star among the constellation of nations. This quote, of course, comes during the height of imperialism during the early 20th century. Not one nation in Africa at this time was free from European rule, save for Ethiopia. However, ironically, if we consider this the origins of the term woke and do literally any research, we find Marcus Garvey was actually himself a racist. Garvey was born to a moderately successful Afro-Jamaican family in Kingston Town. He believed in Pan-Africanism, or the unification of Africa into a single political entity. Clearly, a big brain idea. Who would be the leader of this great nation? Conveniently, Garvey nominated himself and declared himself to be the provisional president of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League, or UNIA. He was ideologically a black nationalist, and his ideas would come to be known as Garveyism. He campaigned for the enactment of laws which would ensure black racial purity, as well as coordinating with the KKK to ensure their common goals of racial separation and segregation. In 1923, Garvey was convicted of mail fraud and believed the conviction was politically motivated, blaming the Jews for his conviction given his interaction with the KKK. Quite the character. His sentence was commuted by U.S. President Calvin Coolidge in 1927, and he was subsequently deported back to Jamaica. He died in 1940 after never visiting the continent he claimed to care so much for and be the president of. Now, do these origins immediately invalidate the woke movement as being racist or rooted in evil or satanic or whatever politicized bullshit people like to come up with nowadays? No, of course fucking not. Do I look like a primetime news anchor? Thankfully, I have the mental capacity to understand that the meaning of words and movements can change over time, sometimes resulting in something completely counter to its initial intention. But certainly, at a minimum, the irony is palpable, and a little fucking hilarious, that the movement now so concerned with social justice and integration seemingly had its origins in a man who himself was, indeed, a racist. Particularly given the fact that every website I visited researching this video conveniently fails to mention his views. The next major appearance of the term was during the civil rights movement in the 1960s, where Martin Luther King gave a speech at Oberlin College. Quote, "The great challenge facing every individual graduating today is to remain awake through this social revolution." Of course, the social justice movement was a time of great change and justice for the African American community, and Martin Luther King was one of its great leaders. Being aware of the segregation and injustice going on at the time was extremely important and prevalent, so clearly the allusions to being awake and aware of the issues at hand was a valid and important step in the right direction for the justice and freedom of African Americans. Finally, we arrive at the modern day, where the now major influence and prevalence of the term woke comes into effect. This started in the early 2010s with the Black Lives Matter movement and the killing of Trayvon Martin by George Zimmerman. This event, along with many other instances of police brutality, led to a resurgence, and I would argue the true birth of the term, initially within the African American community. To be woke became a battle cry for Black people and society at large to recognize and unify behind African Americans, to fight for their ability to be free and to live their lives as equal members in society, free from brutality, oppression, and injustice. And forevermore, the term would remain as a positive reminder of the true justice it helped achieve. Just kidding. As with most good ideas created by Black people, white people stole it, and co-opted the word and construed it into something else entirely. After the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, the term quickly became a way for woke white people, as well as political radicals, to identify themselves with the cause of equality and inclusion without actually doing any work. It became less about taking a stand with our brothers and sisters for justice in society, and more a quick way to alleviate feelings of white guilt around minorities or oppressed peoples. Why do anything tangible about a problem when you can raise your hand in the air and act like what you are saying has an impact, when in reality you haven't lifted a finger, or more importantly, sacrificed anything tangible of your own for the movement you vehemently claim to fight for? This was arguably the beginning of the end of woke being a force for good in society. Now we see a massive overcorrection in an attempt to right the injustices of the past, motivated by the wrong ideas and ideals. Classical liberalism supports the idea of freedom for all people, which is a just and righteous desire. However, the woke mindset requires people to fall in line with whatever the perceived narrative of the day is, regardless of whether it is reasonable or rooted in fact. Fear is now the primary motivator. To question the woke establishment, which I guess used to be Twitter? I mean, I don't know though. Like, Elon took over, now Twitter's racist. I don't know, man. Everything happens so damn fast these days. To question the woke establishment results in excommunication and cancellation. If you do not follow blindly, you are an enemy, and labeled as such. And the unfortunate truth is that not enough liberals, and moderates for that matter, are willing to call out the fringe for what it is: fucking hypocrisy. More recently, we have become so woke in our pursuit of diversity and inclusion that we have, in fact, brought back segregation. Many universities across the country allow marginalized and minority communities to participate in graduation ceremonies containing only people coming from certain affinity groups. Affinity groups being people who share a common race, sexual orientation, etc. Many within the woke community defend this decision as a way to celebrate these cultures and minorities for who they are. But if our goal as a society is to reach a point where our differences don't divide us and where we can all celebrate in unison, then how is this solution supposed to get us closer to that point? The Supreme Court ruled decades ago that separate but equal accommodations are, in fact, inherently unequal, regardless of whether the motivations are oppressive in nature or, as they try to argue in this case, virtuous. I mean, seriously, if we take this principle to its logical conclusion, which would allow graduation ceremonies containing only white people to occur, what kind of message does that send? And to try and justify how it is somehow different for marginalized communities because of previous oppression or disenfranchisement is completely missing the point. There is no excuse for separation. Unity is progress. Segregation is regression. Certainly, wanting some of your peers to look like you and share your beliefs when celebrating an achievement is understandable, and to see yourself in someone who looks like you is part of being human. But to have all of your peers look like you and share your beliefs is counter to the idea of higher education, which is to surround yourself with people who look different, think different, talk different, act different, so that you yourself may grow and change as a person in a positive way. That cannot be accomplished in a homogeneous community. Another great example of woke regression is the extreme overuse of cultural appropriation. Now, to the assholes who actually do make fun of other people's cultures and differences to purposefully hurt and disenfranchise, you can go fuck yourself. But the fundamental principle that we should participate in each other's cultures in a respectful way should not be shot down. It should be supported. We should strive to engage and engross ourselves in new cultures, ideas, and mindsets so that we can learn and become better people. Not stonewall those from trying new things because it is offensive or triggering. The woke movement leaves no room for this sort of nuanced thinking. Feelings should not determine the laws and rules of our society. Principles and objective ideas should. I mean, seriously, at the rate we are going, I won't even be able to cook non-white food for fear of culturally appropriating it. Seriously, have you seen that shit? It's quite typical for a woke person to claim these arguments are dog whistles, or made in bad faith, and that no mind should be paid to them. Never have I heard such a fucking cop-out response from the people who claim to be the most educated and the most enlightened. I'm not attempting to claim that wokeism is a conspiracy or some bullshit. Rather, it is a community of fringe individuals whose arrogance blinds them into believing that they are correct in their pursuit of justice, but in reality are merely propagating the cycle which allows the divides of injustice to remain and prosper. The new standard of wokeness is, at its core, a fringe extreme of classical liberal ideas. We cannot, as moderates and liberals, allow the voice of the few to represent the voice of the many. In fact, by not addressing these clearly unpopular ideas for fear of rapprochement and cancel culture, we have empowered the gradual radicalization of our beliefs and society as a whole. In fact, most moderates and thoughtful liberals who I've personally interacted with find wokeness to be annoying and obtrusive, but because it is too troublesome to stand up and make necessary corrections, they just let it ride, perpetuating the cycle of radicalization we find in society today, coming from both the left and the right.